Blood roared in Maxwell's ears as the auction handler's whip struck the trembling thoroughbred, the crowd watching with cold indifference to the animal's suffering. In the lame horse's desperate eyes, he recognized his own lost purpose, a connection that propelled his 73-year-old body into action before his mind could process what his heart already knew. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning air hung heavy with dust and desperation as Maxwell Reed stood silently at the edge of the auction barn. He was a man out of place among the boisterous crowd of buyers, traders, and curious onlookers who had gathered for the county's largest livestock auction. At 73, Maxwell's weathered face told the story of decades spent under the unforgiving sun, working the land that had been in his family for generations. His green sweater, worn at the elbows but meticulously clean, stood in stark contrast to the casual attire of most attendees. Maxwell hadn't planned on attending the auction that day. In fact, he had promised himself he wouldn't set foot in another auction barn after selling off the last of his own horses 3 years ago, following his wife's passing. But something had drawn him here, a feeling he couldn't explain, like a whisper on the wind calling him to this place on this particular morning. The auction barn bustled with activity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the sawdust-covered floor. The wooden bleachers surrounding the central ring creaked under the weight of eager bidders. The air smelled of animals, sweat, and anticipation, a scent Maxwell knew all too well from his years as a horse breeder and trainer. Next up, lot number 47. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the speakers, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Former racehorse thoroughbred, 9 years old. Maxwell's attention sharpened. 9 was young for a horse to be at this type of auction, the kind where animals often ended up purchased for slaughter or shipped to Mexico or Canada for processing. Something wasn't right. A door swung open at the far end of the ring, and 2 handlers struggled to lead in a magnificent bay thoroughbred. Despite the animal's obvious distress, Maxwell could see the hallmarks of racing royalty in his conformation: the deep chest, powerful shoulders, and elegant lines that spoke of speed and heart. But something was wrong with the horse's gait. He moved with a pronounced limp, his left hind leg barely touching the ground. "As you can see, this one's got a bum leg," the auctioneer announced, not bothering to hide the disappointment in his voice. Previously raced under the name Crimson Lightning, won a few minor stakes races back in his day. Owners cutting losses, no papers provided, sold as is. Maxwell felt his heart constrict. He knew what sold as is meant for a lame racehorse. The animal had no value to racers or pleasure riders. His destiny was all but sealed. The handler, a burly man with a face hardened by years of handling difficult animals, yanked roughly on the lead rope when the horse balked at entering the center of the ring. The thoroughbred tossed his head, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Despite his injury, the horse still carried himself with dignity, his dark eyes intelligent and wary. "Come on, you worthless nag," the handler muttered, loud enough for those in the front row to hear. He gave another sharp tug, causing the horse to stumble forward awkwardly on his injured leg. Maxwell's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had seen enough horses mishandled in his lifetime to recognize the dangerous combination of an inexperienced handler and a frightened animal. The thoroughbred was not being difficult out of stubbornness but out of fear. "Let's start the bidding at $300, the auctioneer called out, his voice rising and falling in the familiar cadence of the trade. "Do I hear $300 for this thoroughbred? Former racer? Could be used for breeding or—" There was an uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew what was left unsaid, that the most likely buyer would be a kill buyer, someone who purchased unwanted horses cheaply and sold them to slaughterhouses. "All right, $200 then. Do I hear $200? A hand went up in the back corner. A man Maxwell recognized as one of the local kill buyers. His stomach turned. $200 from Mr. Johnson. Do I hear $250? This is a thoroughbred, folks. Good bloodlines. The horse grew increasingly agitated as the handler continued to jerk on the lead rope. Without warning, the thoroughbred reared up, nearly pulling the rope from the handler's grasp. The crowd gasped, and several people in the front row scrambled backward. "Control that animal," the auctioneer barked. The second handler stepped forward with a riding crop and struck the horse sharply across the flank. The thoroughbred let out a sound that was halfway between a scream and a whinny, a noise of pure distress that cut through Maxwell like a knife. Something snapped inside him. Before he realized what he was doing, Maxwell was pushing his way through the crowd toward the ring. "Stop that right now." His voice, strengthened by decades of commanding working animals, rang out across the auction barn. The handlers turned in surprise, and the auctioneer fell silent mid-sentence. Maxwell climbed over the short wooden fence and approached the horse with slow, deliberate movements. The handlers looked uncertainly at each other, then at the auctioneer, who seemed too shocked to speak. "Easy now, boy," Maxwell said softly, extending his hand, palm up toward the trembling animal. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." The thoroughbred's ears flicked forward, his nostrils flaring as he caught Maxwell's scent. There was recognition in those intelligent eyes, not of Maxwell specifically, but of someone who understood horses, who spoke their language. "Sir, you can't be in the ring during an auction." The auctioneer finally found his voice. Maxwell ignored him, keeping his focus entirely on the horse. He continued his approach until he stood beside the magnificent animal. With gentle hands, he stroked the thoroughbred's neck, feeling the tremors that ran through the powerful muscles. "I've got $200 from Mr. Johnson," the auctioneer continued uncertainly. "Do I hear $250? $500, Maxwell said, without taking his eyes off the horse. A murmur ran through the crowd. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. $500 from Mr. Sir, your name, please?" "Maxwell Reed," he replied, finally looking up. "I bid $500. The kill buyer in the back raised his hand. $550. Maxwell turned to face the thoroughbred fully now, taking in the scars on his legs that told the story of a hard racing career. He looked at the swollen left hind leg, an old injury, poorly healed. But most of all, he looked into those eyes, deep pools of intelligence and fear, and saw something worth saving. $800, Maxwell countered, his voice firm. The kill buyer frowned but raised his hand again. $850. Maxwell knew what was happening. The buyer wasn't particularly interested in this horse, but Maxwell's intervention had piqued his interest. Perhaps he thought the horse had some value he'd overlooked, or perhaps he simply didn't like being challenged. $1,000, Maxwell said, louder this time. Another murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer looked between Maxwell and the buyer, his gavel raised. $1,000 going once. The kill buyer shook his head slightly. The price had exceeded what he could make from processing. $1,000 going twice. Sold to Mr. Reed for $1,000. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly quiet auction barn. Maxwell exhaled slowly, only now realizing he'd been holding his breath. He turned back to the thoroughbred, who was watching him with cautious curiosity. Leaning close to the horse's ear, Maxwell whispered words meant only for him. "You still have a purpose, boy. This isn't the end for you, I promise." As if understanding, the thoroughbred lowered his head slightly and exhaled a warm breath against Maxwell's chest. In that moment, surrounded by strangers in a place he'd never planned to visit, Maxwell felt the first stirrings of a connection that would change both their lives forever. The auction continued around them, but Maxwell remained in the ring, one hand resting on the thoroughbred's neck. The handlers had relinquished the lead rope to him with obvious relief, glad to be rid of the difficult animal. An auction assistant approached with paperwork for Maxwell to complete the sale. "You'll need to remove the horse now, sir," the assistant said, glancing nervously at the next animal being readied for auction. "We've got 20 more lots to get through before lunch." Maxwell nodded, accepting the clipboard and signing where indicated. As he handed back the paperwork, the auction manager approached, a heavy-set man with a perpetual frown. "You know that animal's lame, right?" the manager said, not unkindly. "No refunds once you've signed. All sales are final." "I know exactly what I'm buying," Maxwell replied with quiet confidence. The manager shrugged. "Your money, your choice. Got transport for him?" Maxwell hesitated. He hadn't planned on purchasing a horse today. He'd driven his old pickup truck without a trailer, never expecting to leave with anything more than memories. "I can arrange something," he said, his mind already working on the problem. "There's a holding pen out back," the manager offered. "Horse can stay there until end of day, but he's got to be gone by closing." Maxwell thanked him and gently led the thoroughbred from the auction ring. The horse followed willingly, though his limp was pronounced. Every few steps, the animal would hesitate, shifting his weight to favor his injured leg. Maxwell adjusted his pace accordingly, allowing the thoroughbred to move at his own speed. As they emerged from the noisy auction barn into the relative quiet of the back pens, Maxwell finally had a chance to properly examine his impulsive purchase. In the natural light, the horse's condition was even more evident than it had been under the harsh fluorescence inside. His coat, though dull from poor nutrition, was a deep bay with only the faintest dusting of gray around his muzzle. His frame was impressive, nearly 17 hands high, with the substantial bone structure of a racehorse bred for endurance and speed. But the thoroughbred had clearly fallen far from his glory days. Ribs showed through his coat, and old scars marked his legs where bandages had once been. His left hind leg was noticeably swollen around the fetlock joint, evidence of an injury that had never properly healed. Maxwell guided the horse into an empty holding pen and secured the gate. Only then did he release the lead rope, giving the thoroughbred space to move freely within the confines of the small enclosure. The horse took a few cautious steps, then lowered his head to investigate the ground for any remnants of hay. "Hungry, aren't you?" Maxwell murmured, noting the eagerness with which the animal searched for food. "Let's see what we can do about that." He made his way to a feed stall nearby where auction staff were preparing hay portions for the animals still awaiting sale. A young worker looked up as Maxwell approached. "Need some hay for that thoroughbred I just purchased," Maxwell explained. "He's in the back pen." The worker nodded and handed over a modest flake of hay. "That's Crimson Lightning, isn't it? Shame what happened to him." "He was something special a few years back." Maxwell's interest piqued. "You know this horse?" "Know of him," the worker corrected. "My dad's a racing fan. That horse had real potential before the injury. Won a few decent stakes races as a 4-year-old. Then he went down in a claiming race at Belmont, bad fall. Owner tried to bring him back too soon. Never ran the same after that." Maxwell nodded thoughtfully, gathering this new information about his charge. "What happened to his original owner?" The worker shrugged. "Horses are business to those types. When they stop earning, they move on. Horse probably changed hands a few times before ending up here." Maxwell thanked the worker and returned to the pen with the hay. The thoroughbred's ears pricked forward at the sight of food, but he maintained a cautious distance as Maxwell entered. Only when Maxwell had placed the hay on the ground and stepped back did the horse approach to eat. While the thoroughbred ate, Maxwell used his cell phone to make arrangements. His first call was to his neighbor Jim Harrison, who owned a horse trailer and owed Maxwell a favor or two. "You bought a what?" Jim's voice crackled through the speaker, disbelief evident in his tone. "A thoroughbred," Maxwell repeated patiently. "Former racehorse. He's injured, but sound enough to transport." "Max, have you lost your mind? What are you going to do with a lame racehorse at your age?" Maxwell glanced at the thoroughbred who was watching him over a mouthful of hay. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I couldn't leave him here." Jim sighed audibly. "All right, I'll bring the trailer. Give me an hour." The next call was to Sarah, the local veterinarian who had tended to Maxwell's horses for over 20 years. She'd been one of the few people who understood his grief when he'd sold off his small breeding operation after Helen's death. If anyone would help without judgment, it would be her. While he waited, Maxwell pulled a folding stool from outside the pen and sat where he could observe the thoroughbred. The horse had finished the hay and was now standing quietly, his injured leg slightly raised to alleviate pressure. Despite his poor condition, there was an undeniable nobility in his bearing, a remnant of the champion he once had been. "Crimson Lightning," Maxwell said softly, testing the name. The horse's ears flicked in his direction. "Too formal for everyday use. How about just Crimson?" The thoroughbred blinked, his dark eyes fixed on Maxwell with what seemed like cautious interest. For a moment, man and horse regarded each other in silence, each taking the measure of the other. "You and I are both past our prime," Maxwell continued, speaking in the gentle tone he'd always used with horses. "They think we've outlived our usefulness, but they're wrong." Slowly, giving the horse plenty of time to see his intentions, Maxwell stood and approached the pen's railing. He extended his hand, palm up, and waited. For several long moments, the thoroughbred remained where he was, watching Maxwell warily. Then, with deliberate steps, he limped forward until his muzzle was inches from Maxwell's outstretched hand. The horse's breath was warm against Maxwell's palm. After a brief hesitation, Crimson extended his neck and allowed Maxwell to touch his face. The simple gesture of trust brought an unexpected lump to Maxwell's throat. "Good boy," he whispered. "We're going to be all right, you and me." By the time Jim arrived with the trailer, a small crowd had gathered to watch Maxwell with the thoroughbred. Word had spread quickly about the old man who had outbid a kill buyer to save a lame racehorse. Some looked on with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with something approaching respect. Jim, a robust man in his 60s with a perpetual tan from working outdoors, assessed the situation with a practiced eye. "He doesn't look as bad as I expected," he admitted, watching as Maxwell calmly led Crimson from the pen. "Still, that leg needs attention." "Sarah's meeting us at my place," Maxwell assured him. "She'll know what to do." Loading Crimson into the trailer proved surprisingly straightforward. The thoroughbred seemed to understand that Maxwell was helping him, following his gentle guidance without resistance. When the ramp was secured behind him, Crimson remained calm, as if relieved to be leaving the auction behind. As they drove away from the auction grounds, Maxwell sat in the passenger seat of Jim's truck, his thoughts on the horse in the trailer behind them and the unexpected turn his life had taken in just a few hours. "You still haven't told me why," Jim said, breaking the companionable silence between them. "Why this horse? Why today?" Maxwell considered the question, looking out at the familiar countryside rolling past. "Because he wasn't done yet," he finally replied. "And neither am I." Maxwell's farm appeared on the horizon, a modest homestead nestled among rolling pastures that had been in the Reed family for 4 generations. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered barn and the small white farmhouse where Maxwell had lived his entire life. It wasn't a grand operation, just 30 acres with a 6-stall barn, a round pen, and several fenced pastures. But it had once been the heart of a respectable breeding program for quarter horses. For the past 3 years, those stalls had remained empty, the paddocks overgrown. After Helen's passing, Maxwell had lost the will to continue the business they had built together. One by one, he had sold off his beloved horses, keeping only the land as a connection to the life they had shared. Jim maneuvered the truck and trailer into the barnyard with practiced ease, backing up to the barn's wide doors to minimize the distance Crimson would need to walk. As the engine fell silent, Maxwell could hear the familiar sounds of the farm, birds calling from the old oak tree by the house, the distant lowing of his neighbor's cattle, the gentle rustle of wind through the tall grass. "Home sweet home," Jim remarked, climbing down from the driver's seat. "Though I never thought I'd be delivering a thoroughbred to your doorstep, Max." Maxwell smiled wryly. "Life's full of surprises." A dusty SUV pulled into the driveway as they were preparing to unload Crimson. Sarah Jenkins stepped out, veterinary bag in hand. At 40, she was relatively young for a large animal vet in their rural area, but she had earned Maxwell's trust years ago with her straightforward manner and genuine care for the animals she treated. "When you said you bought a horse at auction, I thought you were joking," Sarah called as she approached. "Helen would have had something to say about this." "She would have beaten me to it," Maxwell replied, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. Helen had always been the soft-hearted one, constantly bringing home strays and rescues. She never could resist an animal in need. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. She had known Helen well, had been there through her illness, making house calls when necessary to spare Helen the distress of worrying about the horses during her final months. "Let's see what we've got," Sarah said, her tone shifting to professional assessment as she peered into the trailer. Crimson stood quietly, his head low, exhaustion evident in his stance. When Maxwell opened the trailer door and lowered the ramp, the thoroughbred hesitated only briefly before following him out with halting steps. Sarah whistled softly. "That's Crimson Lightning, isn't it? I treated some of Joseph Warren's horses a few years back when he was still keeping them at Riverdale Stables. I recognize the blaze pattern." "You know his original owner?" Maxwell asked, surprised at the connection. "Knew of him," Sarah corrected. "Wealthy businessman, dabbled in racing as a hobby, had a reputation for being impatient with injured horses." She approached Crimson slowly, giving him time to recognize her as a non-threat. "Hello, handsome. Remember veterinarians? We're the ones with the treats." As if to prove her point, she produced a small apple from her pocket. Crimson's ears pricked forward, and he stretched his neck cautiously to accept the offering. "Let's get him settled in a stall first," Maxwell suggested. "Then you can give him a proper look over." Together they led Crimson into the barn. The familiar smell of hay and wood shavings brought a flood of memories to Maxwell. Early mornings checking on pregnant mares, late nights during foaling season, the quiet contentment of barn chores shared with Helen. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the immediate needs of the horse before him. Maxwell had prepared the largest stall with fresh bedding and filled the water trough before leaving for the auction. Now he added a small portion of hay to the feed bin, careful not to overdo it for a horse whose digestive system might be compromised from poor care. Once Crimson was settled, Sarah began her examination. Her hands moved with gentle efficiency over the horse's body, checking vital signs, assessing body condition, and probing gently for any reaction that might indicate pain. "He's underweight, but not critically so," she reported as she worked. "Dehydrated, though, and his coat shows signs of nutritional deficiencies. How long has he been at that auction barn?" "Worker there said he might have changed hands several times after his racing career ended," Maxwell replied, leaning against the stall door. "Could have been anywhere." Sarah nodded grimly. "Well, the good news is most of this is fixable with proper care and feeding." She moved to Crimson's hindquarters and bent to examine the swollen leg. "This, however, is our biggest concern." For several minutes, she carefully palpated the injured leg, watching Crimson's reactions closely. The horse flinched but stood patiently, as if understanding that Sarah was trying to help. "Old racing injury," she finally concluded, straightening up. "Looks like a severe tendon tear that healed poorly. Probably rushed him back into training too soon." She shook her head. Typical. These magnificent animals give everything they have, and when they break down, they're discarded like worn-out equipment. Can it be helped? Maxwell asked, the question uppermost in his mind. Sarah considered for a moment. It won't ever be perfect, Max. That ship sailed when the original injury wasn't given proper time to heal, but we can make him more comfortable. Anti-inflammatories, cold therapy, possibly some regenerative treatments if you're willing to invest in those. He'll always have that limp, but we can improve his quality of life considerably. Maxwell nodded, already committed to whatever was necessary. Just tell me what he needs. As Sarah continued her examination, Jim excused himself, promising to check in tomorrow. Maxwell barely noticed his departure, his attention focused entirely on Sarah's assessment and Crimson's well-being. Overall, considering what he's been through, he's in remarkably good shape, Sarah concluded, packing up her equipment. His heart and lungs sound good, no signs of respiratory issues, and his eyes are clear. He's a survivor, this one. She handed Maxwell a list of medications and supplements, along with detailed instructions for Crimson's care. Start slow with the feeding, small frequent meals until his system adjusts. I'll come back in a few days to check that leg again and start him on a proper treatment plan. After Sarah left, Maxwell pulled up a stool outside Crimson's stall and simply sat watching the thoroughbred explore his new surroundings. There was something meditative about observing a horse become accustomed to a space, the careful investigation of each corner, the testing of water, the cautious sampling of hay. As dusk fell, Maxwell turned on the small barn lights, casting a warm glow throughout the structure. He should go inside, he knew, make dinner, rest, prepare for the early morning that would come whether he was ready or not. Yet he found himself reluctant to leave. You know, he said conversationally to Crimson, who had settled into a steady rhythm of eating. The auction manager asked me if I knew what I was doing, buying a lame horse. He chuckled softly. Truth is, I haven't known what I was doing since Helen died. Just going through the motions, I suppose. Crimson lifted his head, hay protruding from his mouth, and gazed at Maxwell with those intelligent eyes. But today, for the first time in a long while, I did something that felt right. Something Helen would have done. Maxwell stood, his joints protesting after the long day. We'll figure out the rest as we go. As he turned to leave, Maxwell paused at the stall door. You still have a purpose, he whispered again, echoing the promise he'd made at the auction. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help me find mine again too. Dawn broke over the farm with a gentle persistence that roused Maxwell from a deeper sleep than he'd experienced in months. For a moment he lay still, listening to the familiar symphony of morning, birds calling from the trees, the distant clatter of his neighbor's machinery starting up for the day, the soft whisper of wind through the open window. Then he remembered Crimson. With a newfound urgency, Maxwell rose and dressed quickly. His morning routine, which had become a listless affair in recent years, now had purpose. He swallowed his daily medications with a glass of water, made a quick cup of coffee, and headed to the barn, eager to check on his new charge. The thoroughbred was already awake, standing alert at the front of his stall. When he caught sight of Maxwell, his ears pricked forward in recognition. There was wariness still in those dark eyes, but something else too. Expectation, perhaps even the beginnings of trust. Good morning, Maxwell greeted him, pleased to see that Crimson had eaten most of his hay overnight. The water level in the trough had dropped as well, all good signs that the horse was settling in. How are we feeling today? Crimson snorted softly, as if in response. Maxwell smiled and opened the stall door, moving slowly and deliberately as he approached. The thoroughbred stood his ground, neither advancing nor retreating. Progress from the day before. With gentle hands, Maxwell checked the swollen leg, which seemed marginally improved after a night of rest. Following Sarah's instructions, he applied a cooling gel to the injured area, speaking softly to Crimson throughout the process. The horse flinched initially, but then stood still, seeming to understand that this strange sensation was meant to help. "You're a good patient," Maxwell told him, straightening up. "Better than I was after my knee surgery. Drove Helen crazy with my complaining." The morning routine established itself naturally over the next few days. Maxwell would arrive at the barn early, clean Crimson's stall while the horse ate a small breakfast of specialized feed that Sarah had recommended. Then came medications, leg treatments, and a brief session of hand walking to keep the injured leg from stiffening completely. Sarah visited again on the third day, pleased with Crimson's initial progress. "His eyes are brighter," she observed, running her hands along the thoroughbred's neck, "and he's carrying himself better. You've got a good touch with him, Max." "He's making it easy," Maxwell replied, though he felt a quiet pride at her words. "Smart horse, figures things out quickly. Thoroughbreds usually do. They're bred for intelligence as well as speed." Sarah administered an injection of anti-inflammatories, then stepped back to observe Crimson's reaction. "I think we can start some light physical therapy next week. Nothing strenuous, just some passive range of motion exercises to improve circulation in that leg." Maxwell nodded, mentally adding this new task to the care regimen he was developing. Where once his days had stretched before him empty and purposeless, they were now structured around Crimson's needs. It gave him a reason to rise each morning, a focus that had been missing since Helen's death. As the first week progressed, Maxwell noticed subtle changes in both Crimson and himself. The thoroughbred's coat began to regain some of its natural luster as proper nutrition took effect. His eye was clearer, his demeanor more alert. The swelling in his leg, while still pronounced, had decreased enough that he was placing more weight on it. Maxwell, too, felt different. The persistent ache in his joints seemed less noticeable when he was busy with barn chores. He found himself planning improvements to the long-neglected paddocks, envisioning a time when Crimson might be sound enough to enjoy limited turnout. He began ordering supplies, better quality hay, specialized supplements, a new set of grooming tools. "You're bleeding money on that horse," Jim remarked during one of his frequent visits to check on their progress. "Sarah's treatments alone must be costing a fortune." Maxwell shrugged, watching as Crimson methodically worked his way through a small portion of premium alfalfa. "What else am I spending it on? Can't take it with me." Jim studied his old friend with knowing eyes. "Helen would approve, you know, of all this." He gestured to the newly organized barn, the medication chart Maxwell had taped to the wall, the specialized brushes arranged neatly on a shelf. "She always said you needed a project to keep you out of trouble." Maxwell smiled at the memory. Helen had understood him better than he understood himself sometimes. She had known that his taciturn nature concealed a deep need to be useful, to care for something beyond himself. "I found his racing records online," Maxwell said, changing the subject. He pulled a sheaf of printed papers from a folder. 15 starts, 3 wins, including a Grade 3 stakes race at Belmont, placed in several others. Earned just over $300,000 before the injury. Jim whistled. Not too shabby. "He was good," Maxwell agreed. "Could have been great, maybe, with the right connections. After the breakdown, he disappeared from the records. That was 3 years ago. Wonder where he's been all that time." Maxwell had wondered the same thing, imagining the series of owners who had passed Crimson along as his usefulness diminished, each transition likely marked by diminishing care and increasing neglect. The thought filled him with a quiet anger, but also with determination. Whatever Crimson's past had been, his future would be different. The challenges became evident as the initial honeymoon period waned. Crimson, feeling better, grew more energetic and consequently more frustrated by the limitations of stall rest. Maxwell found him pawing at the ground one morning, ears pinned back in irritation. "I know," Maxwell soothed, understanding the thoroughbred's restlessness. "It's not fair, is it? All cooped up when you want to run." Sarah had warned him this might happen. "Thoroughbreds are athletes," she'd explained. "They're conditioned to work, to move. Confinement is mentally hard on them, even when it's medically necessary." To address this, Maxwell began spending more time with Crimson beyond the necessary care. He would bring a chair into the stall in the evenings, reading aloud from the newspaper or one of Helen's old novels while Crimson dozed. Sometimes he would simply talk, telling the horse about his day, about the farm's history, about Helen. "She would have loved you," he told Crimson one evening, massaging the horse's neck as he had seen Sarah do. "Had a soft spot for the proud ones, the fighters. Said they just needed someone to see past the attitude to the heart underneath." Crimson leaned into Maxwell's touch, his eyes half closed in contentment. These quiet moments became the highlight of Maxwell's day, the time when he felt most at peace, most connected not just to the horse but to something larger than himself. 1 month after the auction, Sarah arrived for her weekly checkup with a new device, a therapeutic ultrasound wand that she said might help stimulate healing in the damaged tissues of Crimson's leg. "Technology's advancing all the time in equine medicine," she explained as she demonstrated the technique. "Things we couldn't fix 5 years ago are treatable now." Maxwell watched attentively, determined to master every treatment that might help Crimson. "Will he ever be sound enough to ride?" he asked, voicing the question that had been forming in his mind. Sarah considered carefully before answering. "Possibly, with enough time and the right approach. Light riding might actually benefit him eventually. But Max..." She looked at him directly. "Are you thinking of riding him yourself?" Maxwell hadn't considered the question until Sarah asked it. At 73, with an artificial knee and a back that protested even mild exertion, the idea of climbing onto a thoroughbred, even a rehabilitated one, seemed foolhardy. Yet something stirred in him at the thought. How long had it been since he'd sat in a saddle? 5 years? Longer? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Hadn't thought that far ahead." Sarah nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. "Well, that's a bridge to cross when we get there. For now, let's focus on getting him comfortable enough for limited turnout. His mental health is just as important as his physical recovery." Over the next few weeks, Maxwell expanded Crimson's world incrementally. First came hand-walking sessions in the barn aisle, then short excursions into the small paddock adjacent to the barn. Crimson's first time in the open air since his arrival was a sight to behold. The thoroughbred stood motionless for several moments, nostrils flared as he drank in the scents of grass and earth and freedom. Then, with a soft snort that seemed almost like a sigh of relief, he began to explore the space, moving with a care that suggested he was mindful of his limitations. Maxwell watched from the fence, a lump in his throat. There was something profound in witnessing this animal, built for speed, bred to run, taking such deliberate, measured steps. It spoke of an intelligence and adaptability that moved him deeply. As Crimson's strength improved, so too did his personality emerge. The wary, defeated horse from the auction barn was giving way to a character both dignified and mischievous. He developed a habit of untying his lead rope if Maxwell didn't secure it with an extra knot. He would knock his empty feed bucket against the stall door when he decided it was mealtime, regardless of the actual hour, and he had a particular whinny, soft and low, that seemed reserved exclusively for Maxwell's arrivals. "You're spoiling that animal rotten," Jim commented one afternoon, watching as Maxwell meticulously groomed Crimson in the barn aisle. Custom feed, special treatments, talking to him like he understands every word. People will start to talk. Let them, Maxwell replied, unconcerned. He ran a soft brush over Crimson's gleaming coat, each stroke a gesture of care. Besides, he does understand. Maybe not the words, but the intention behind them. Jim shook his head, but there was no real criticism in his expression. You're different, you know. Since you got him. Maxwell continued brushing, avoiding Jim's gaze. Don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You're engaged again, making plans. Hell, you even fixed that broken fence in the north pasture, something I've been nagging you about for 2 years. Maxwell couldn't deny it. The lethargy that had plagued him since Helen's death had receded, replaced by a sense of purpose that grew stronger each day. He rose earlier, slept better, ate proper meals instead of the haphazard nutrition he'd subsisted on before. He'd even resumed his monthly dinners with other local farmers, social engagements he'd abandoned in his grief. It's good, Jim continued, his voice gentler now. Helen would be pleased. Maxwell nodded, acknowledging the truth in his friend's words. Helen had worried about him in her final days, extracting promises that he would carry on, that he wouldn't retreat from life entirely. Promises he'd made sincerely, but had found increasingly difficult to keep as the months without her stretched into years, until Crimson. The thoroughbred nudged Maxwell's shoulder gently, as if sensing the shift in his mood. Maxwell patted his neck absently, grateful for the silent companionship. Summer gave way to autumn, and with the changing season came new milestones in Crimson's recovery. Sarah, pleased with his progress, suggested they begin more active rehabilitation, controlled exercise to rebuild the atrophied muscles in his hindquarters. We'll start with walking over raised poles, she explained, demonstrating the setup in the round pen. It forces him to lift his legs higher, engaging those weaker muscles. Then gradually we'll introduce gentle hill work, long walks on varying terrain. Maxwell absorbed her instructions with the same focused attention he'd given all aspects of Crimson's care. Each new therapy represented hope, not for a complete recovery, which Sarah had made clear was unrealistic, but for a comfortable, dignified life for an animal that had once been discarded. The work was demanding for both horse and man. Maxwell found muscles he'd forgotten he possessed as he led Crimson through increasingly complex exercises. There were setbacks, days when the thoroughbred's leg would swell from overexertion, or when pain made him resistant to even the gentlest handling. On those days, Maxwell would simply sit with him, offering the comfort of presence until the worst had passed. Patience was never my strong suit, he confessed to Crimson during one such episode. Always wanted results yesterday, drove my farmhands crazy. Helen was the patient one, could wait out anyone or anything, said all the best things in life required waiting. He smiled at the memory. Guess I'm finally learning that lesson in my old age. As autumn deepened, bringing with it crisp mornings and the first threat of frost, Maxwell found himself thinking more concretely about Crimson's future, and by extension, his own. The thoroughbred was now sound enough for extended turnout in the small paddock. His limp, while still noticeable, had improved dramatically. Sarah had begun to discuss the possibility of light groundwork training, perhaps even limited riding by spring. The question that had been forming in Maxwell's mind for weeks finally crystallized into decision. If Crimson could be ridden, then Maxwell would ride him. Age and infirmities be damned. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. It had been so long since he'd challenged himself, since he'd done anything that carried even the slightest risk. "What do you think, old boy?" he asked Crimson as they walked the perimeter of the paddock one golden afternoon. "Think you could tolerate an old man on your back? We'd take it slow, just walking at first. Nothing fancy." Crimson flicked an ear in Maxwell's direction, his stride steady and purposeful beside him. In the slanting autumn light, the thoroughbred's coat gleamed like burnished copper, and his eye was bright with a vitality that had been absent that day at the auction. Whatever hardships he had endured, whatever pain he still carried, Crimson moved through the world now with a quiet dignity that Maxwell couldn't help but admire. The decision made, Maxwell began his own preparations alongside Crimson's continued rehabilitation. He dug out his old riding gear from the storage closet, boots stiff with disuse, a helmet that probably needed replacing, gloves worn soft at the fingertips. He began a modest exercise regimen of his own, building strength in his legs and core, improving his balance. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Sarah asked when she found him practicing mounting and dismounting, using the wooden fence as a substitute for a horse. "Never been more serious about anything," Maxwell replied, slightly breathless from exertion. "If he's going to do his part in this recovery, then I need to do mine." Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when you first brought him home, I thought you were just trying to save him." "I was," Maxwell said simply. "But it's more than that now, isn't it?" Maxwell looked toward the paddock where Crimson grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "Maybe we're saving each other." Winter descended on the farm with quiet insistence, bringing with it new challenges for Crimson's rehabilitation. The cold made his injured legs stiffer, requiring longer warm-up periods before exercise. Icy patches in the paddock presented hazards that Maxwell addressed by spreading sand and restricting turnout to the warmest part of the day. Inside the barn, he installed an additional heater and purchased a therapeutic blanket that provided gentle warmth to Crimson's hindquarters. "You're turning that barn into a 5-star equine resort," Jim observed during one of his visits, stamping snow from his boots as they entered the cozy structure. "Heat, specialized bedding, that fancy water system. What's next? A personal masseuse?" Maxwell smiled, unperturbed by the teasing. "If it helps him heal, I'd consider it." In truth, the improvements benefited Maxwell as much as they did Crimson. The heated barn provided a refuge from the bitter cold, a place where he could work comfortably despite the arthritis that plagued his hands in winter. The rubber mats he'd installed to provide better footing for Crimson also cushioned his own aging knees as he went about his chores. During these short, dark days of winter, Maxwell's bond with Crimson deepened in ways that transcended the typical relationship between horse and handler. They developed routines and rituals that structured their days. Morning grooming sessions where Maxwell would share news from the paper, afternoon walks in the covered portion of the barn when weather prohibited outdoor exercise, evening visits where Maxwell would simply sit on a hay bale outside Crimson's stall, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes reminiscing about his life with Helen. "She loved winter, you know," he told Crimson one evening as snow fell softly outside. "Said it was the season that showed a person's true character. Anyone can appreciate spring," she'd say, "but it takes a special soul to see the beauty in barren branches and frozen fields." Crimson listened with pricked ears, his intelligent eyes fixed on Maxwell, as if absorbing every word. These one-sided conversations had become a form of therapy for Maxwell, allowing him to vocalize memories and feelings that had remained bottled up since Helen's death. In Crimson, he found an attentive listener who offered neither judgment nor hollow consolation, just quiet acceptance. By mid-January, Sarah declared that Crimson's recovery had progressed to the point where they could begin the process of reintroducing him to a saddle. "Nothing ambitious," she cautioned. "Just getting him accustomed to the weight and feel again. And Maxwell," she added with a pointed look, "this doesn't mean you'll be riding him tomorrow. There's a process here." Maxwell nodded, concealing his impatience. The riding equipment he'd ordered, a specially designed saddle with extra padding to accommodate Crimson's conformational issues, a gentle bit, a safety vest for himself, had arrived weeks ago. But he understood the importance of Sarah's methodical approach. Rushing now could undo months of careful rehabilitation. The first session with the saddle was a modest success. Crimson's initial tension at the familiar equipment eased as Maxwell talked him through each step, praising his calm responses. By the end of the week, the thoroughbred was comfortable enough with the saddle that Sarah suggested they begin the next phase, introducing weight. "I've asked my assistant to help with this part," Sarah explained when she arrived with a young woman Maxwell hadn't met before. "This is Lily. She's studying equine therapy at the university and has experience with rehabilitation cases like Crimson's." Lily stepped forward, extending her hand to Maxwell. She was in her early 20s with a practical ponytail and the confident manner of someone comfortable around large animals. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reed. Dr. Jenkins has told me so much about your work with Crimson." "Just Maxwell, please," he replied, surprised to be regarded as someone doing noteworthy work, rather than just an old man with an impulsive rescue. Lily's approach with Crimson was gentle but assured. She spent several minutes just standing with him, allowing the thoroughbred to become accustomed to her presence before beginning the desensitization exercises Sarah had planned. With Maxwell holding Crimson's lead rope, Lily gradually applied pressure against his side, simulating the weight of a rider. "He's responding beautifully," Lily observed. "Many ex-racehorses struggle more with this transition. You've built an incredible trust with him." The sessions continued 3 times a week, with Lily increasing the pressure incrementally as Crimson's confidence grew. Maxwell observed each interaction closely, not only to learn the techniques but to gauge Crimson's responses. The thoroughbred's trust in him was evident in the way he would look to Maxwell for reassurance during new exercises, settling immediately when Maxwell murmured encouragement. By early February, Sarah and Lily agreed that Crimson was ready for Maxwell to mount for the first time. They chose a clear, mild day for the attempt. Jim came to assist along with Sarah and Lily, ensuring that every safety precaution was in place. "Remember, just sitting for a few moments is enough for today," Sarah reminded Maxwell as he prepared. "No movement, no expectations. This is about acclimation, not action." Maxwell nodded, his heart racing with a combination of nervousness and anticipation. It had been so long since he'd sat on a horse. What if his body couldn't remember how? What if he frightened Crimson? What if he fell and injured himself, leaving the thoroughbred without a caretaker? As if sensing his anxiety, Crimson turned his head and gently nudged Maxwell's shoulder. The gesture, so simple yet so perceptive, steadied him. "We'll be fine," he whispered to the horse. "Together." With Jim holding Crimson's head and Lily standing ready to assist, Maxwell placed his foot in the stirrup. His artificial knee protested the angle, but he pushed through the discomfort. Using the mounting block Sarah had positioned, he slowly lifted himself up and over, settling carefully into the saddle. The world shifted beneath him, a sensation both foreign and achingly familiar. Crimson stood perfectly still, his ears flicking back and forth as he processed this new development. Maxwell released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, allowing his body to remember the feel of sitting astride a horse. "How does he feel?" Sarah asked quietly. "Solid," Maxwell replied, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. "Strong." For several minutes they remained there, man and horse united in stillness, relearning each other in this new configuration. When Sarah finally signaled that it was time to dismount, Maxwell did so with reluctance, already eager for their next session. That night, Maxwell called his daughter, Catherine, who lived 3 states away with her family. Their relationship had been strained since Helen's death, not from any specific conflict, but from Maxwell's withdrawal into grief and Catherine's inability to bridge the emotional distance. Their conversations over the past few years had been perfunctory, duty-driven rather than genuine connections. "Dad?" Catherine's surprise at his call was evident in her voice. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I wanted to tell you about something new in my life." He paused, suddenly uncertain how to explain Crimson and all that the thoroughbred had come to mean to him. "I've got a horse again." There was silence on the line as Catherine processed this unexpected news. "A horse? But you sold all the horses after Mom died. You said you were done with that part of your life." "I thought I was," Maxwell admitted, "but sometimes life has other plans." As he shared Crimson's story, the auction, the rescue, the months of rehabilitation, Maxwell felt something shift between them. For the first time in years, he was speaking to his daughter not from obligation, but from genuine desire to share his life with her. "He sounds special," Catherine said when he finished. "I'd like to meet him sometime." Maxwell smiled, a warm hope kindling in his chest. "I'd like that too. Maybe when the weather improves, you and the kids could visit." "I think we'd all enjoy that," she replied, and Maxwell could hear the smile in her voice, a sound he'd missed more than he'd allowed himself to acknowledge. When they hung up, Maxwell went out to the barn for one last check on Crimson before bed. The thoroughbred was resting peacefully, but lifted his head at Maxwell's approach. "We did good today, old boy," Maxwell told him, reaching through the bars to stroke his nose. "Real good." Spring arrived at the farm with a gentle persistence, first in small ways, snowdrops pushing through the last patches of snow, birdsong returning to the old oak tree, days stretching longer with each sunset. As the world awakened from winter's slumber, so too did Maxwell and Crimson begin a new chapter in their journey together. Their riding sessions progressed from simple sitting to short walks around the covered portion of the barn, then into the small arena Maxwell had refurbished over the winter. Each milestone, however modest, felt like a triumph. The first time Crimson carried Maxwell for a complete circuit of the arena, Sarah had documented the occasion with her phone camera, capturing the subtle pride in both man and horse. "You two look like you've been partners for years," she remarked, showing Maxwell the image, Crimson with his ears pricked forward attentively. Maxwell sitting straight in the saddle despite his years, a quiet confidence in his posture. The photo now sat framed on Maxwell's bedside table, next to the last picture taken of Helen before her illness had claimed her vitality. Sometimes in the quiet of evening, Maxwell would look at both images and imagine Helen's reaction to his unlikely friendship with the thoroughbred. She would have understood immediately, he thought. She always saw connections where others saw only coincidence. As April yielded to May, their sessions grew longer and more varied. Under Sarah and Lily's guidance, Maxwell introduced gentle exercises designed to strengthen Crimson's hindquarters while maintaining the careful balance that protected his injured leg. They worked mostly at a walk, occasionally incorporating brief periods of trotting on good days when Crimson showed no signs of discomfort. "He's exceeding all my expectations," Sarah told Maxwell during one of her now bi-weekly visits. "When you brought him home, I honestly wasn't sure he'd ever be rideable. Now look at him." They both watched as Lily led Crimson through a series of ground poles, the thoroughbred lifting his feet with deliberate precision, his movement more fluid than it had been even a month earlier. The pronounced limp that had marked him as damaged at the auction had moderated to a slight unevenness in his gait, noticeable to an expert eye perhaps, but no longer defining his entire way of moving through the world. "He had the will," Maxwell said, "just needed someone to recognize it." The same might be said of Maxwell himself, though he would never have made the comparison aloud. The man who had shuffled through empty days following Helen's death now rose each morning with purpose. The calendar on his kitchen wall, blank for so long, now featured appointments and reminders, farrier visits, therapy sessions, a planned trail ride when summer arrived. He'd even marked his daughter Catherine's upcoming visit in red ink, a weekend in June when she and her children would come to meet Crimson and see the changes at the farm. The prospect of their visit had prompted Maxwell to tackle long-neglected projects around the property. He repainted the guest room, fixed the loose boards on the front porch, and enlisted Jim's help in repairing the old tire swing that had hung from the oak tree since Catherine was a child. Each task completed felt like a stitch mending a tear in the fabric of his life, not erasing the hole left by Helen's absence, but creating something new and whole around it. One warm afternoon in late May, as Maxwell was grooming Crimson in the barn aisle, a truck he didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged man in a polo shirt and khakis stepped out, surveying the property with an appraising eye before approaching the barn. "Mr. Reed?" the stranger called, stopping a respectful distance from Crimson. "Maxwell Reed?" Maxwell nodded, one hand resting protectively on Crimson's neck. "That's me. I'm Joseph Warren." The name hung in the air between them. "I believe you have my horse." The claim landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through Maxwell. Joseph Warren, Crimson's original owner, the wealthy businessman who had discarded him after his injury. Maxwell's hand tightened involuntarily on the brush he was holding. "Ex-horse, from what I understand," Maxwell replied, his voice deliberately calm, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Crimson Lightning was sold several times after you discarded him." Warren's expression tightened at the word discarded, but he maintained his composure. "Yes, well, situations change. I've been looking for him for some time. When my racing manager mentioned seeing him here, I thought I should come personally." "Why?" The question came out more sharply than Maxwell intended. "I've been reconsidering my breeding program," Warren said smoothly. "Looking to incorporate bloodlines with proven heart, not just speed. Crimson always had exceptional heart." He stepped closer, extending a hand toward the thoroughbred, who backed away, pressing against Maxwell's side. "I'm prepared to offer you a very fair price. Considerably more than you paid at that auction, I'm sure." Maxwell felt a cold dread spreading through him. This man, with his expensive watch and casual presumption, had the resources to take Crimson away if he was determined enough. What chance would an elderly farmer have against a wealthy businessman in a legal dispute over a horse? "He's not for sale," Maxwell said, the words coming automatically, instinctively. Warren smiled thinly. "Everything has a price, Mr. Reed. Name yours." Maxwell looked at Crimson, at the intelligent eyes that now held a wariness they hadn't shown in months. He thought of their progress together, the trust they'd built, the future they were working toward. Something Helen had once said floated back to him. "The things that matter most can never be bought or sold." "Mr. Warren," Maxwell said, his voice steady now, "I understand you have a business interest in Crimson, but he's not a business asset to me. He's family." Warren's expression flickered between surprise and irritation. "That's a charming sentiment, but let's be practical. You're, what, in your 70s? What happens to him when you're gone? At least with me, he's guaranteed a comfortable retirement when his breeding days are done." The question struck at Maxwell's deepest fear, that his age might limit the years he could provide for Crimson. Yet the presumption behind it, the casual cruelty of raising his mortality as a negotiating tactic, stiffened his resolve. "I appreciate your concern for my longevity," Maxwell said dryly, "but Crimson's future is secured regardless of mine. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a physical therapy session scheduled." Warren studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "I'll leave my card. When you reconsider, call me." He placed a business card on a nearby shelf, then turned to go. At the barn door, he paused. "He looks good, by the way. Better than I expected given the injury." After Warren's departure, Maxwell stood with his hand on Crimson's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing. The encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. The idea that someone could simply appear and try to buy Crimson, as if the bond between them could be dissolved with a sufficient amount of money, filled him with a cold anger. But beneath the anger lay a kernel of doubt. Was Warren right about one thing? What would happen to Crimson when Maxwell was gone? The question demanded an answer, a plan more concrete than vague assurances. That evening, after ensuring Crimson was settled for the night, Maxwell sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and pen. By the time he went to bed, he had outlined a trust for Crimson's care, a list of potential guardians, and a letter to his attorney requesting an appointment to formalize these arrangements. Whatever the future held, he would ensure that Crimson never again faced the uncertainty that had brought him to that auction ring. Catherine's arrival on a sunny Friday afternoon in June marked the first time Maxwell's farmhouse had welcomed family in over 3 years. The sound of children's voices, his grandchildren, Emma and Jack, now 10 and 8, filled the once quiet rooms with a vibrancy that seemed to chase away lingering shadows. Maxwell watched them explore the house with a mixture of joy and regret, aware of all the visits that hadn't happened, the milestones he'd missed in his self-imposed isolation. "The place looks good, Dad," Catherine said, setting her bag in the freshly painted guest room. Her eyes took in the new curtains, the repaired floorboards, the general sense of revival that permeated the old farmhouse. "Really good. You've been busy." Maxwell nodded, uncertain how to explain that preparing for their visit had given him a purpose beyond his daily care of Crimson. That in anticipating their arrival, he had rediscovered his connection not just to the future but to his own past, to the home he and Helen had built together. "When can we see the horse, Grandpa?" Jack's question burst forth as soon as the initial settling in was complete. "Mom said you saved him from bad people." "After lunch," Maxwell promised. "He'll be awake from his nap by then." Emma rolled her eyes with the worldly wisdom of a 10-year-old. "Horses don't take naps, Grandpa." "This one does," Maxwell replied with complete seriousness. "Very particular about his afternoon rest. Quite grumpy if he misses it." The children exchanged skeptical glances, not entirely sure if their grandfather was teasing them. Catherine caught Maxwell's eye over their heads and smiled, a genuine smile that reminded him so much of Helen that his breath caught momentarily. After a simple lunch on the porch, Maxwell led his family to the barn. He found himself unexpectedly nervous, as if Crimson's approval of his family was somehow crucial. The thoroughbred was indeed resting, his head lowered in the afternoon quiet of the barn, but he lifted it immediately at the sound of Maxwell's familiar footsteps. "There he is," Maxwell said softly as they approached the stall. "Crimson, meet the rest of the family." The children, momentarily awed into silence by the horse's size and presence, stood half-hidden behind their mother. Catherine stepped forward first, extending her hand, as Maxwell had taught her to do with horses when she was a child. "Hello, Crimson," she said. "I've heard a lot about you." Crimson regarded her thoughtfully, then stretched his neck to sniff her outstretched fingers. Whatever assessment he made must have been favorable, for he allowed her to stroke his nose gently. "He's beautiful, Dad," Catherine murmured, genuine admiration in her voice. "I can see why you fell for him." Emboldened by their mother's example, Emma and Jack edged closer. Maxwell showed them how to offer their hands flat, how to stand so as not to startle the horse. Crimson, for his part, displayed a patience with the children that confirmed Maxwell's long-held belief in the thoroughbred's exceptional character. He accepted their tentative pats with dignified grace, even lowering his head to allow Jack to reach his nose. "Can we ride him?" Emma asked, her initial shyness forgotten. "Not ride exactly," Maxwell explained, "but if you'd like, you can sit on him while I lead him around the paddock. Would you like that?" The enthusiastic response from both children settled the afternoon's agenda. Maxwell carefully led Crimson to the paddock, where he had Catherine boost first Emma, then Jack, onto the thoroughbred's back. Crimson stood perfectly still during the process, his ears flickering occasionally as if listening to the children's excited whispers. Maxwell guided Crimson in a slow circuit of the paddock, one hand on the lead rope, the other resting reassuringly on the horse's shoulder. Emma sat straight and proud, her expression serious with the responsibility of being trusted on such a magnificent animal. Jack, behind her, couldn't contain his delight, his smile wide enough to crease his cheeks. Catherine watched from the fence, her phone raised to capture the moment. "Mom would have loved this," she said when Maxwell returned to her side, having lifted the children down and turned Crimson loose to graze. "She always said you were at your best with horses and children." The simple observation, Helen's perception of him, preserved and shared by their daughter, touched Maxwell deeply. He had been at his best with horses and children once, before grief had narrowed his world to the confines of empty rooms and solitary meals. Watching his grandchildren now as they stood at the paddock fence, pointing out Crimson's elegant movements to each other, he felt a profound gratitude for this second chance at connection. That evening, after the children were asleep, Maxwell and Catherine sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea, the same way he and Helen used to end their days. The familiar ritual with his daughter in Helen's place created an ache of both loss and renewal. "I need to thank you," Catherine said after a comfortable silence. "For what?" "For finding your way back." She looked at him directly, her expression earnest in the porch light. "After Mom died, when you started selling the horses, pulling away from everything, I was afraid we'd lost you too." Maxwell's throat tightened. He had never considered how his retreat into grief must have appeared to his daughter, herself mourning her mother while watching her father disappear into himself. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I didn't know how to be in the world without her." Catherine reached across the small space between their chairs and took his hand. "I know, Dad. I just wish it hadn't taken a lame racehorse to bring you back to us." The gentle teasing made him smile, but her words carried a truth he couldn't deny. "He reminded me that there are still things worth caring about," Maxwell admitted. "Things worth fighting for." The conversation drifted to practical matters: Catherine's work, the children's school, the trust Maxwell was establishing for Crimson's future care. When she heard about Joseph Warren's visit, Catherine's expression hardened. "The nerve of that man," she said. "After abandoning Crimson when he was injured, to show up expecting to buy him back like some discarded possession he suddenly remembered." "He won't be back," Maxwell assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced of this himself. Men like Warren were accustomed to getting what they wanted, one way or another. As if reading his thoughts, Catherine added, "If he does come back, you know you're not alone in this, right? I'm just a phone call away. We all are." The simple reassurance that he had family to call upon, that he wasn't facing the world alone, settled something in Maxwell that had been unsettled since Warren's unexpected appearance. Helen had always been his partner in life's battles, large and small. Without her, he had assumed he would face each challenge in solitude. But here was Catherine, offering alliance and support, reminding him that family connections remained, even when their shape had changed. The weekend passed too quickly. Trail walks through the meadow, a picnic by the stream, hours spent teaching Emma and Jack the rudiments of horsemanship. By Sunday afternoon, when the time came for goodbyes, Maxwell found himself making plans for their next visit rather than retreating into the shell of loneliness that had once been his refuge. "Maybe at the end of summer," Catherine suggested as they loaded the car. "We could come for a whole week. The kids would love it." "I'd like that," Maxwell replied, and meant it. Crimson would too. After their departure, the house seemed quieter, but not empty in the way it had before. The echoes of children's laughter lingered, and Maxwell found himself looking forward rather than back, to Catherine's next visit, to tomorrow's session with Crimson, to the small, meaningful rituals that now structured his days. Summer unfurled across the farm in waves of green and gold. Fields that had lain dormant through winter now burst with life, offering crimson varied terrain for the increasingly ambitious walks that formed the cornerstone of his therapy. Maxwell had mapped out routes of progressive difficulty, gentle slopes to strengthen the thoroughbred's hindquarters, soft forest paths to improve his proprioception, open stretches where they could practice transitions between walking and trotting. Their daily excursions became the highlight of Maxwell's day. There was something deeply satisfying about venturing beyond the confines of the arena, about watching Crimson navigate the natural world with growing confidence. The thoroughbred seemed to share his enthusiasm, always alert and engaged, his ears flicking back and forth as he processed the sights and sounds of the farm. "He's a different horse from the one we saw at that auction," Jim remarked one evening as he joined Maxwell for their now regular Friday dinner. "If you'd told me last year that he'd be trail walking with this level of soundness, I'd have called you delusional." Maxwell nodded, pleased by his friend's assessment, but reluctant to take full credit. He had it in him all along, just needed time and consistency. "And you," Jim added pointedly, "don't sell yourself short, Max. That horse wouldn't be where he is with just anyone." Before Maxwell could dismiss the compliment, his phone rang, an unusual occurrence in the evening. The screen showed Sarah's number. "Maxwell, sorry to call so late." Sarah's voice came through clearly, her tone professionally cheerful, but with an undercurrent of excitement. "I've just had the most interesting conversation with the organizers of the County Agricultural Fair." Maxwell listened as Sarah explained that the fair committee was planning a special exhibition on equine rehabilitation success stories. "They're looking for examples of horses that have overcome significant physical challenges," she continued. "I immediately thought of Crimson. Would you consider participating?" The request caught Maxwell off guard. He and Crimson had developed a comfortable routine over the past months, one that accommodated both their limitations. The idea of presenting themselves for public display, of subjecting Crimson to the noise and chaos of the county fair, seemed fraught with potential complications. "I don't know, Sarah," he said hesitantly. "That's a lot of stimulation for him, and for me, if we're being honest." "I understand the concern," Sarah replied, "but I think it could be valuable not just for the exhibition, but for both of you. Crimson needs to experience different environments as part of his continued rehabilitation, and this would be a controlled setting with veterinary support on hand." When Maxwell remained silent, she added, "Think about it. The exhibition is still 6 weeks away, plenty of time to prepare and to back out if it doesn't feel right." After hanging up, Maxwell walked out to the barn for his nightly check on Crimson. The thoroughbred greeted him with the soft nicker that had become his customary welcome, extending his neck over the stall door for attention. "What do you think, old boy?" Maxwell asked, rubbing the white star between Crimson's eyes. "Are we ready to show the world what we've accomplished?" The question lingered in his mind over the following days. During their rides, Maxwell found himself paying closer attention to how Crimson responded to novel stimuli. A tractor in the distance, birds suddenly taking flight, the neighbor's dog barking from across the field. The thoroughbred remained remarkably level-headed, a testament to his innate intelligence and the trust they had built. 2 weeks later, Maxwell called Sarah to accept the invitation. "We'll do it," he said, his decision made after long consideration. "But I have conditions. We'll need to visit the fairgrounds beforehand to acclimate him. And I want you there during the exhibition, just in case." Sarah readily agreed to his terms, her enthusiasm evident. "This is going to be wonderful, Maxwell. People need to see what's possible with patience and proper care, and Crimson deserves to be celebrated for how far he's come." The preparation for the exhibition added a new dimension to their training regimen. Maxwell worked with Lily to desensitize Crimson to potential fair stimuli, flapping flags, loudspeaker announcements, crowds of people approaching at once. They practiced loading and unloading from Jim's trailer until Crimson could do so calmly without hesitation. A month before the fair, they made their first visit to the fairgrounds. The vast open space, with its permanent buildings and temporary stalls, was deserted save for a few maintenance workers. Maxwell led Crimson around the perimeter, allowing him to investigate the unfamiliar surroundings at his own pace. The thoroughbred was alert, but not fearful, his trust in Maxwell evident in his willingness to follow where led. As the exhibition date approached, Maxwell found himself contending with an unexpected emotion: pride. Not pride in himself, though Sarah and Jim were quick to praise his role in Crimson's transformation, but pride in the thoroughbred's resilience, his willingness to trust again after all he had endured. The horse that had stood trembling in the auction ring, one step away from slaughter, now moved through the world with quiet dignity and growing confidence. The morning of the exhibition dawned clear and bright, the late August sun promising warmth without excessive heat. Maxwell rose early, allowing extra time for the careful grooming ritual that had become part of their bond. As he brushed Crimson's coat to a gleaming copper, he spoke softly to the horse, more for his own comfort than Crimson's. "Just another ride," he murmured, running the soft brush along the thoroughbred's powerful neck. "Nothing we haven't done before." Jim arrived with the trailer, and Catherine pulled in shortly after, having driven up for the event with Emma and Jack. Their presence bolstered Maxwell's confidence, surrounding him with a family support system he had once thought permanently lost. "You look great, Dad," Catherine said, hugging him briefly. "Both of you do." The fairgrounds were transformed from their earlier visit, now bustling with vendors setting up booths, livestock being unloaded, and early attendees browsing the exhibits. Maxwell felt a momentary panic at the sight of so many people, the noise and activity a stark contrast to the quiet routine of the farm. But Crimson, perhaps sensing his handler's tension, remained surprisingly calm, his ears moving constantly, but his demeanor steady. Sarah met them at the designated warm-up area, her professional smile widening into genuine delight at the sight of Crimson's gleaming coat and alert expression. "Perfect timing," she said. "The demonstration ring will be ready in about 20 minutes. We'll be the second presentation." As they waited, Maxwell became aware of a small crowd gathering at the edge of the warm-up area, watching as he led Crimson through some basic groundwork exercises. The thoroughbred performed beautifully, responding to the lightest touch on the lead rope, his movements fluid, despite the slight unevenness in his gait. "Is that the auction rescue?" Maxwell overheard someone ask. "The one that was headed for slaughter?" "Can't believe it's the same horse," another voice replied. "Look at him now." The comments, not intended for his ears, nonetheless filled Maxwell with a quiet satisfaction. They had come so far from that desperate day at the auction. Both of them changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. Whatever happened in the exhibition ring, they had already succeeded in the ways that truly mattered. When the time came to enter the demonstration area, Maxwell felt a moment of hesitation. The stands were fuller than he had expected, the announcer's voice booming over the loudspeaker as he introduced the exhibition and its purpose. Beside him, Crimson shifted his weight, responsive to the subtle tension in the lead rope. "You still have a purpose," Maxwell whispered, echoing the promise he had made nearly a year ago in a dusty auction barn. "Let's go show them what that looks like." As they entered the exhibition ring, the announcer's voice carried across the fairgrounds. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next presentation features Crimson Lightning, a former racehorse who suffered a career-ending injury and was rescued from auction by Mr. Maxwell Reed just 11 months ago. They're here today to demonstrate the remarkable results that can be achieved through dedicated rehabilitation and proper care." The crowd fell silent as Maxwell led Crimson to the center of the ring. The thoroughbred's ears flicked forward, taking in the unfamiliar environment, but he remained steady beside Maxwell, their months of trust building evident in every calm breath. Maxwell could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them, but found to his surprise that the scrutiny didn't unnerve him. He was exactly where he belonged. When Mr. Reed found Crimson, the announcer continued, reading from notes Sarah had provided, the horse was severely underweight with a pronounced lameness from an old racing injury. Many would have considered him beyond help. Today, they'll demonstrate the progress they've made together. Maxwell gave a slight nod to Sarah, who stood at the edge of the ring, then began the simple routine they had practiced. He led Crimson in a wide circle, allowing the audience to see the thoroughbred's movement from all angles. Yes, there was still unevenness in his gait, a slight hitch in his stride that would never fully disappear. But there was also strength and dignity in the way he carried himself, a far cry from the defeated animal that had stood in the auction ring. After completing several circles in both directions, Maxwell brought Crimson to a halt, and with careful movements that respected his own aging body, mounted the horse. A murmur ran through the crowd. This hadn't been part of the planned demonstration. Sarah stepped forward, concern evident in her expression, but Maxwell gave her a reassuring nod. He and Crimson had been working toward this moment in private sessions, building strength and confidence for them both. They were ready. Settled in the saddle, Maxwell gathered the reins and asked Crimson to walk forward with the lightest of aids. The thoroughbred responded immediately, stepping out with a smooth confidence that belied the complexity of their journey to this point. Together they circled the ring at a steady walk, Maxwell's straight back and quiet hands revealing decades of horsemanship, Crimson's alert ears and relaxed top line showing his trust in his rider. "Remarkable," the announcer commented, genuine awe in his voice. "Less than a year ago, this horse could barely walk without pain. Today, he's carrying a rider with evident comfort and confidence." As they completed their circuit, Maxwell felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Helen would have loved this moment, the culmination of patience and dedication, the public recognition of a horse's innate worth beyond his racing record. She had always believed in second chances, in the healing power of purpose. Somehow, in helping Crimson find his, Maxwell had rediscovered his own. When they finished their demonstration, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Maxwell dismounted with care, giving Crimson an appreciative pat on the neck before leading him toward the exit. As they approached the gate, a familiar figure stepped forward from the crowd, Joseph Warren, his expression unreadable. Maxwell tensed, instinctively placing himself between Warren and Crimson. The thoroughbred, sensing his handler's sudden discomfort, shifted restlessly behind him. "Mr. Reed," Warren said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the ambient noise of the fair. "That was quite a performance." "Not a performance," Maxwell corrected evenly. "Just showing what's possible with time and care." Warren nodded, his gaze moving to Crimson with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "I can see that." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I owe you an apology for my approach when I visited your farm. It was presumptuous." The unexpected admission caught Maxwell off guard. Before he could respond, Warren continued, "I've been watching your work with him today. The connection between you is evident." He extended his hand, not toward Crimson this time, but to Maxwell. "I wanted to let you know I won't be pursuing any claim on him. He's where he belongs." Maxwell accepted the handshake with cautious relief. "Thank you for that." As Warren turned to leave, he added, "My racing manager was right about one thing. That horse always had heart. I'm glad someone finally recognized it." The encounter left Maxwell thoughtful as he led Crimson back to the preparation area where Catherine and the children waited. The acknowledgement from Warren, The man who had once discarded Crimson as worthless felt like the closing of a circle, the resolution of a tension that had lingered at the edges of his consciousness. "Grandpa, you were amazing," Jack exclaimed, rushing forward as they approached. "Crimson too." Emma, more restrained but equally impressed, stroked Crimson's nose with gentle fingers. "Everyone was watching you. A lady next to us said she was going to look into adopting a rescue horse after seeing what you and Crimson can do." The idea that their journey might inspire others to give horses a second chance was deeply satisfying to Maxwell. It expanded the meaning of their work together beyond their personal connection, creating ripples that might benefit animals he would never meet. After Crimson was settled in the temporary stall provided for exhibition participants, Maxwell joined Sarah and Jim at a picnic table in the shade. Catherine had taken the children to explore the fair, promising to return for the award ceremony later that afternoon. "You never told me you were planning to ride him in the demonstration," Sarah said, though her tone held more admiration than reproach. "That was a risk." "A calculated one," Maxwell replied. "We've been practicing at home. He was ready. We both were." Jim clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, it paid off. The exhibition organizers were impressed enough that they're giving you two a special recognition award later today." Maxwell shook his head, uncomfortable with the attention. "We didn't do this for awards." "No," Sarah agreed, "but recognition helps spread the message. Every person who saw you today now knows that a broken-down racehorse isn't necessarily beyond hope. That matters, Maxwell." As the day progressed, visitors stopped by Crimson's stall. Curious fairgoers, local horse owners, even a few children from the 4-H club who asked thoughtful questions about equine rehabilitation. Maxwell found himself sharing their story again and again, each telling, reinforcing the remarkable distance they had traveled together. When Catherine returned with the children for the award ceremony, she handed Maxwell a small package. "This is from all of us," she said. "A thank you for bringing us back together as a family." Inside was a framed photograph of Maxwell and Crimson taken during their visit in June, with Emma and Jack perched happily on the thoroughbred's back. Beneath the image was an engraved plate that read simply, "You still have a purpose." The simple phrase, his words to Crimson that first day at the auction, now reflected back to him by his family, brought unexpected tears to Maxwell's eyes. Helen had worried so much about what would become of him after she was gone. If she could see him now, surrounded by family, honored for his work with Crimson, engaged with the world again in meaningful ways, she would understand that he had found his way back to living, not just existing. Later, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the fairgrounds and they prepared for the journey home, Maxwell took a moment alone with Crimson. The thoroughbred stood quietly beside the trailer, watching the bustling activity of the fair with calm interest. "We did good today, old boy," Maxwell murmured, stroking the white star between Crimson's eyes. "Real good." Crimson leaned into his touch, exhaling a soft breath that warmed Maxwell's palm. In that moment of connection, Maxwell felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them both to this place. Two souls once discarded, now purposeful, whole, and facing the future together.